Hi everybody, and welcome to this session in PM72 on how to build greater accountability in your agile team. My name's Chris Boyes and I'm the founder of Umano.tech, a team performance tool that uses behavioral-led insights from the tools that teams use to help them know where they're at, take data-informed decisions, and ultimately build sustained, high-performing, agile ways of working. So far, the one distinguishing ingredient in high-performing teams that we've observed at Umano, particularly for agile teams at work, is accountability. The concept is simple. Accountable teams are teams in peak performance. They're constantly at the edge. They're learning, they're growing, they're experimenting. Team players are mutually reinforcing with each other's skills. Fundamentally, they're evolving. What's more, they're doing it of their own accord, simply because they want to, and they love being in the process of growing and evolving together. No one is telling them to do anything. Across the thousands of teams I've now had the privilege of playing in, leading, or observing through Umano, the teams that hold themselves accountable are the teams that get ahead. So if being self-accountable is so critical to a team's growth and high performance, why aren't more teams building their accountability muscle? In this session, I want to share what accountability is. I want to share what accountability done well looks like and what accountability done not so well looks like. Specifically, I want to share how teams across the world are currently building and flexing this muscle to move from good to great performance through 6 simple steps. Now, you might be mistaken that I'm the diva today, taking all the limelight for this session. But that's not true. It's interactive, and I want you to share the limelight by participating and sharing your learnings as we go. So to kick off, I'm inviting you to open up your browsers and type in the following URL to open up your dedicated PM72 journal page for this session. You can find it at bit.ly/Umano Accountability. Why interact? So you can be accountable. So you can get what you want out of this session and you can hold me accountable for delivering on that. My goal is to spark that one idea or obvious action that you can take back to your agile team to improve the accountability muscle within your way of working. If you don't get that from this session, I want you to get in touch so I can help. I'm opening up my calendar for 15-minute slots to hear what your accountability blockers are. I'll offer some suggestions on things you might try, and more importantly, share relevant learnings from other teams that we support at Umano and what's working for them. You can select to do that at the bottom of your journal page. At the end of the session, you'll get your notes and responses emailed through, and we'll also follow up to send you a summary of anonymized, collated responses so you can share from all of the other people on this call on the journey of wanting to build accountability within their teams. If you don't have access right now, by all means, get out your paper journals or whatever notes session you use on your desktop, because the act of writing is a reflective practice, and a reflective practice builds your learning culture, one of the key practices of self-accountable, high-performing teams. Have you got your journal open yet? It looks like this. And here's my first question to kick things off. What is it that you want out of today's session? Is there anything specific that's going on in your team right now that led you to choosing this session? Next, do you feel like you're currently part of a high-performing team? And for that same team, what's the number one accountability challenge you believe you have going on right now? As you're thinking about the accountability challenges in your team right now, don't worry, you're not alone. There's plenty of examples of accountability done not so well, and I'm sure you'll resonate with some of the things that are commonly seen as the patterns. Things like stuff just not getting done that was said, that was committed to, not resetting expectations when things weren't done, avoidance, not showing up, being a little bit deluded about reality, a culture of blame, lack of visibility or transparency, the cover-up, good old information silos, no vulnerability or accepting what was going on. I'm just going to get out of the way here. Being a bit stagnant and not moving, lack of momentum, not learning, not evolving, behaviors just simply getting repeated, and the good old groupthink. As you think about this list of anti-patterns of accountability done not so well, let's dive a little deeper and jump into the journal to reflect on your own experience. So what's not performing so well, do you think? What was missing? A definition of what success and the end results look like, perhaps? Maybe sharing an understanding of exactly where you're at or being a little bit deluded about that reality. Is it a lack of clarity around team roles and responsibilities? Perhaps it's about not being clear on the team practices or rituals or norms that guide that sense of collective success. Is it perhaps that feedback loops are missing, or that you're not so clear on what to track because you're not so clear on the measures or indeed the outcomes you're trying to measure? And finally, perhaps it's a lack of supportive culture that really doesn't encourage learning and high expectations that's holding your team's accountability back. Let's flick gears and think a little bit more about what accountability done well looks like. In teams that are high performing with very clear accountability, we see clear aligned action. Teams have got a great grasp on reality and what their risks are. There's defined ownership, roles, and a sense of autonomy. There's agreed measures for what success looks like, with a periodic cadence for review and reflection. There's a learning culture, empowered decision-making. Things are visible, transparent. Everybody's showing up. There's no fear around asking for help or just vulnerability generally. There's lean collaboration. There's a culture of completion. Information is flowing freely with absolute focus on experimentation and iteration underpinned by a growth mindset. Continuing on this theme from your own experience, let's dive into the journal and unpack what good looks like for you. Think of an experience of a team where it was performing really well. What do you think the main drivers were? Again, tick as many you think are as relevant, or just note what's important for you. Now that we have an orientation of what accountability looks like done well and not so well, let's dive a little deeper to define what accountability actually means. Fundamentally, it's the ability to count or to measure, i.e., to account for one's actions, to be explained or understood in that context, and required or expected to justify actions or decisions. In addition, it's to be responsible, having an obligation to do something, or therefore control over or care for something. It's the capability of being trusted and the acceptance of responsibility for one's own actions. And finally, it's a willingness to be transparent, allowing others to observe. If we distill this a little bit deeper, for me, there's a few key words or themes that stand out. Firstly, it's the notion of being trusted or responsible. To enable that, we need to be understood. And to be understood, we need to be able to measure. And to measure, we need to be transparent and observable in the way that we practice and behave. Even more simply put, to be accountable is to be in relationship. So strengthening accountability is to strengthen relationships. Fancy that! High-performing teams are driven by strong relationships underpinned by strong accountability. So the burning question is, how do we build this in agile ways of working together? Let's dive in and see what we at Umano observe to be the 6 steps that build the foundations for strong accountability leading to strong relationships within high-performing teams. Here are the 6 steps to building greater accountability in your team. Number 1, know your end result. 2, be very clear about your current reality. 3, build the bridge, that is, the initiatives, roles and resources, and skills required to connect your current reality to your end result. 4, define the habits, the unique ways of working that will ultimately get you from your current reality to your end result. 5, be clear on the learning loops. And 6, build a supportive and nurturing culture. Let's unpack each of these in more detail. The first step for building accountability in your team is to clearly know where you're headed and what you're focused on creating together as a shared outcome for your customers and stakeholders. Really go deep on this. What does it look like when it's done? How do you see your customers responding? Visualize it. Secondly, step into the emotions of achieving this goal together. Imagine yourselves at the completion stage. What does it feel like? Too often we clinically describe our goals with our logical cognition. Frameworks like SMART and OKR ensure this, and that's great, but be sure to step into the emotion of it because we need to connect with our hearts to what we're doing. We need to feel inspired, and knowing that it's supporting our shared purpose generates the energy to help us stay the course as a team. This is a really great conversation to have with your team when defining your shared goals because it gets you aligned, inspired, and in sync. Next, make sure your goals are transparent and shared. At Umano, we use GTM Hub to list our OKRs, but there's plenty of similar tools like this around. This way, everyone has visibility over what the company objectives are and how the team's shared and individual goals are related and interdependent on shared success. Finally, revisit and refresh your goals consistently. We review ours at Umano at least every quarter to ensure they're relevant and that we're making progress, and if not, what course corrections we may need to make. Even if a refresh isn't required, it's really important to revisit them so as to reconnect with that image and the sense of feelings of success that we articulated earlier, so that your team remains engaged, inspired, and connected. How often does your team revisit your goals and step into the energy of what success looks like? By the way, did I mention high-performing teams do this together? To be accountable means to have a feeling of control over or a sense of responsibility and care for these goals. To accept responsibility for them, they need to be understood. So guess what? High-performing teams are always defining their goals together. Do you really know where you're at today, now, in your project and team? The second step to building accountability in your team is to know exactly where you're at. So often we delude ourselves about our current reality, clouded by optimism bias or simply avoiding the truth and facing up to the facts. It's critical to know where you're at, with facts and figures as well as observable actions to be accounted for. Only when everyone buys into this and gets on the same page can you rally around what needs to be done and take what obvious action there is to take. Firstly, own the reality. When you know it, own it. Secondly, suspend judgment. Don't hook into the emotions of fear or failure or being off track. These feelings aren't relevant to your current situation because they're learned experiences from your past. They bear absolutely no relevance on your current circumstance. Third, define the obvious action to take and course correct. Continue building momentum toward your end results. And finally, share where you're at. Be transparent with your stakeholders and get them on board. Allowing others to observe only helps your team's ability to be understood. Being able to measure where you're at accelerates everybody's understanding, focus, and increases that support when it's needed most. Initiatives are the key actions that build out the stepping stones and connect you from your current to desired reality. In your Agile team's way of working, initiatives are typically referred to as issues. How well defined are these issues for your team? Is there a backlog of what's next to ensure continued momentum? Are they framed as user stories to ensure that the customer is at the center of everything you do? Is there a definition of what done or completion looks like? Does everyone understand how complex these issues are by estimating how long it will take to create them and who needs to be involved? Secondly, how clear are your team's roles and responsibilities? Are role descriptions and responsibilities shared and accessible for all team members for context, handovers, points of dependency, and decision making? When a new team member joins Umano, we openly share their role and areas of responsibility. This way, team members are clear on who they're depending to be successful in their role and what others require from them to be successful in theirs. Team member roles and responsibilities are shared in our Confluence wiki. Also, get clear on what's a team's responsibility and an individual's responsibility. If you don't use a team charter, then do. I can't recommend this tool highly enough. It's been hugely impactful in defining how we work as a team and keeping us really accountable and focused on the core practices that ultimately elevate our success. There's heaps of templates you can find online or within your tools like Jira or Miro, as is our case. Here's a quick view of ours and how we've edited it to really make it suit us and the way we work. At dead center is a statement of our team's purpose. Surrounding that are our shared goals and values, and underneath that are the personal goals and personal needs and expectations, which are so critical in articulating to ensure we're all getting out of this experience what we want and what we need. Secondly, surrounding that, we've got a clear statement of the people and their roles, as well as the core practices that we're focused on improving during this particular time frame, be it a quarter. Underpinning this are the behaviors and practices that we've named that are holding us back and what we're going to do about specific growth opportunities to remediate those, and also a statement of shared strengths and assets across individuals so that we can lean into those and ultimately play to each other's strengths to get a better and more effective way for delivering success. And so in summary, get crystal clear on what it will take for your team to close the gap and who's going to do it with which skills. Now that you're clear on your what and who, it's time to revisit your how. And this is where step 4 comes into building your team accountability. Habits. Every tribe have their habits, the rituals and rhythms that define how they work to achieve an end result together. And in the context of work, of course, companies have their own habits and rituals. But what are the unique ones specific to your team that set your way of working apart from everybody else in the company that you work with? The first pillar of a habit are really the practices, and that is the behaviors that we apply to actually get stuff done. For example, in our team, a defined team practice is that no issue hits a sprint until it's titled, described with done defined, and estimated if appropriate. Another practice is that no pull request is merged without a review from another team member to really ensure that governance around quality assurance. We set and review our practices quarterly so we can define what best affects our speed, quality, and happiness overall. When it comes to the second pillar of habits, cadence, Umano's rhythm is set by quarterly OKRs. Each month within the quarter, we build out or groom the backlog with issues that we agree to be mission critical for achieving our shared objective. We run on weekly sprint cycles because we perform better on our agile success metrics in Umano than when we ran on a fortnightly cycle. It's that simple. The third pillar is ceremonies. Your team's cadence is set and punctuated by its ceremonies. Quarterly reviews and planning, sprint reviews and planning, daily check-ins. Each Friday, we host a showcase, sprint review, and plan for the next week's sprint. As an aside to why Friday, we could see on Umano that our sprint completion rate was dropping to around 40% of the work that was assigned for that sprint. Not great. To re-energize our attention and focus on completing what we said we would, we set a goal to complete at least 65% of the work assigned to each sprint and use Umano to track the progress against that goal. To help our chances of success, one of the actions we took was to shift our sprint review and planning meetings from Monday morning, where open issues tended to lag unfinished over the weekend under the promise that they would get finished, to a Friday afternoon, where everyone was accountable to complete and showcase their work at the end of the sprint. Know your team's rhythm and make it work to your advantage. Another ritual that we have now is that, purely because of working remotely, team members co-located in the same city come together for Friday lunch prior to jumping online for our end of sprint ceremonies. Learning loops are simple. Measure, reflect, focus, and act. And repeat. The reason learning loops are so critical to building your team's accountability and ultimate team success is that they bring a discipline to how your team grows and evolves. They unlock those small, iterative, continuous and compounding actions that foster your team's learning culture and ultimately unlock your agility and your ability to be resilient. Learning loops sustain your team's ongoing evolution and growth into a sustained peak performance. How you learn and how you apply that learning has an incredible impact on your ability to be self-directed, self-managed, and self-improving. When considering how your team builds their learning loop, make sure they're measuring what matters, i.e., the outcome you're actually trying to achieve. Don't get into analysis paralysis. Stay really focused on those outcomes. If you haven't already read it, I recommend a great book of the same title by John Dewar, Measure What Matters. Umano does this by thinking about measuring a team's agility outcomes, like speed or progress in the context of the way they design and build or review each other's work. In setting that outcome as a preferred attribute or behavior, we then list a set of metrics that inform how you're working toward that attribute or behavior. Secondly, define the data inputs you need to feed the metrics and learn what you need to learn about your outcomes. What tools are going to feed the quantifiable measures and what surveys provide the qualitative context. Thirdly, build out your dashboard. And please don't use PowerPoint for this. There are so many awesome tools out there, particularly in Atlassian Marketplace, that help you to visualize your data with out-of-the-box charts and metrics, all the way through to very sophisticated business intelligence tools and solutions. Finally, automate your reporting process end to end. I still know teams that spend 2 to 3 days of manpower a month building and collating reports. I'd argue tools are going to do this for you much more efficiently and effectively, and the upside is you get to put your team back onto doing what they love. What's not to love about that? I'm sure you've all come across Pearson's Law before. When performance is measured, performance improves. When performance is measured and reported, the rate of improvement accelerates. One of the key takeaways for me in understanding how we build our learning loops at Umano is the faster the learning loop, the faster our team's growth. If you really want to accelerate your path to high performance, build a faster learning loop. The sixth and final step to building accountability in your agile team is culture. Any culture, as you know, is a reflection of your behaviors, of what you do and don't do. Any accountability culture sets expectations on the required behaviors from the outset. Being clear on the behaviors that are acceptable and unacceptable in your environment is ultimately what's going to define and set your team apart in the way you practice and deliver success for your customers. To quote Seth Godin on the word unacceptable, the word has a very specific meaning, which is why it's so powerful. If we accept behavior that's unacceptable, We're compromising on something that we thought was too important to compromise on. And that's how we end up with the unacceptable becoming commonplace. Have you defined what's unacceptable as a team for yourselves? The second element to a culture of accountability is the notion of being pulled, not pushed. At Umano, one of the core principles is that accountability needs to be pulled by teams and individuals. It cannot be pushed or imposed by an external authority. Building a culture that supports Scrum values provides psychological safety for those teams that embrace self-accountability as part of being self-organized. This also logically drives autonomy and mastery, along with the benefit of deepening an individual's connection to their place of work and tribe. There's no tolerance for blaming, finger pointing, or butt covering in genuine Scrum values. Finally, I love the work of Stanford professor Carol Dweck in defining the difference between a growth and fixed mindset. A growth mindset is a core differentiator for nurturing and sustaining high performance in your team. And so in the context of accountability, how do you nurture growth mindsets in your team? And more importantly, how are you keeping in check a fixed mindset when you see it? And so there you have it. 6 essential steps to building accountability in your agile team. Number 1, get very clear on the end result. Know that North Star and rally around it. Understand what it looks like and how it feels to be successful having completed it. Secondly, get clear on your current reality and where you're at today. Don't fall into the trap of optimism bias or deluding yourself with where things really are. Only by knowing where you're at today can you ultimately course correct and take the obvious action that will close the gap sooner and more effectively to reach your end result. Thirdly, the bridge. These are the initiatives, the roles and responsibilities, and the skills required to connect you from your current reality to your end result. Again, be crystal clear in understanding what these are and sharing through observability how you're all interdependent in working toward that end result as a team. Fourth, habits. These are the guardrails, the practices, the rituals, and the ceremonies that ultimately set your way of working to be the most effective and efficient as possible in moving you toward that end outcome. Fifth, your learning loops, the discipline to measure, reflect, act, and repeat, and ultimately to grow and evolve into your peak, higher performing selves. And finally, culture, defining what's unacceptable, pulling rather than pushing, and absolutely protecting, nurturing, and fostering a growth mindset. So thanks for joining, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your PM72. Don't forget to submit your journal if you want to get a collated summary of anonymized results. Good luck on the journey. Bye for now.